This is video 4 in my series of how to become a virtual bookkeeper. And in this video, we're going to talk about business formations, how to file the appropriate paperwork, and things like that to get started actually running your business. So I just want to point out that I'm not an attorney, I'm not a CPA, so you would want to talk to someone in your area to get more specific advice. This is a very general video where I'm just trying to point you in the right direction and give you some information. So the first thing I want to talk about is your business structure, your business formation. I put the 3 main business formations on the board, and we're going to talk about each of these, and then we'll also talk about some of the other popular ones that you may have heard of. So the first one would be a sole proprietorship. That's just a business with one owner. And this is considered the easiest business formation to start because it's not a lot of paperwork. You can actually just start doing business as your own name, your first and last name, and start doing bookkeeping right away as a sole proprietor. Just keep in mind that if you're a sole proprietor, you're considered one tax entity with your personal taxes. So if you also have W-2 income and then you're doing your bookkeeping business, all that's going to go on one tax return. The sole proprietorship income and expenses would be reported on the Schedule C on your tax return, on your personal tax return. And in this type of business, for you to pay yourself, you would basically take draws, and that's just basically pulling money out of the business bank account if you have a separate bank account and transferring it or writing a check to yourself to put in your personal account. You would not set yourself up as a W-2 employee in this formation of business. You would have to pay self-employment tax and do estimated tax payments if you are a sole proprietorship. But like I said, it is considered the easiest business formation. Probably the biggest downside or negative of this type of business is that you have something called unlimited liability. And what that means is if you can't pay business debts or if someone sues the business, then they can go after your personal assets to pay those debts or pay those lawsuits. So just keep that in mind, that there is more of a liability risk in this type of business. So you can have a good insurance policy to offset that risk, but I just want to point out that it is there. And then the second type of business would be a partnership, which is a business with 2 or more owners. And this is similar to a sole proprietorship. The only difference is there's more than one owner, and you would file a separate partnership tax return. More than likely, if you formed a partnership, say you and another person wanted to start doing remote bookkeeping together and be partners in a business, then you might decide to form this, but you would probably get an attorney to draw up a partnership agreement for you if you were going to go this route, or that's what I would recommend, just to make sure everything's in writing and all of that. But for this type of business, you would also take draws from the business to pay yourself to your personal bank account, and you would not set yourself up as a W-2 employee under this business formation. And it also has that unlimited liability that I was talking about for a sole proprietorship. So just keep that in mind, that there's potential if your partner went out and took on a business debt, that's considered your debt as well. Even if it's for the business, you have that unlimited liability that someone could come after your personal assets. So you just want to be careful. I would get an attorney, get some advice from an attorney if you're going to go this route. And then a corporation is just a business with shareholders or stockholders. So the owners of the company are the shareholders or the stockholders. And this is going to be a little more complicated to set up. You're definitely going to have to file something with your Secretary of State. I'm not sure how to form a corporation in another country, but in the United States, you would more than likely file something with the Secretary of State in your state. And you would have to know a little bit more information, like how many shares of stock you want to have and things like that. But it is very possible to have a corporation with you being the only shareholder. And for this, there is limited liability. If you have debts of the corporation that can't be paid or someone sues the corporation, they're not going to go after your personal assets to pay those debts or pay those lawsuits. So that is the plus of a corporation. You are considered a completely separate entity from the corporation. You would definitely have a separate bank account, and it would be a separate tax return and things like that. And you would pay yourself as a W-2 employee if you formed a corporation. And then in addition to these business formations, there are some other ones that you've probably heard of. An S corporation is basically a C corporation that elects to have this S corporation status, and it just has different tax advantages. You would need to talk to a CPA in your area to find out if that's something you want to do. And then, of course, you have the limited liability company, the LLC, which is supposed to take the benefits of the other formations without the negatives. So I didn't mention this before, but a corporation, a negative is something called double taxation, because the corporation is taxed on the profits of the business, and then sometimes the corporation will take those profits and issue it to the shareholders as dividends, and the shareholders would pay tax on the dividends. So it's the same income, that profit being taxed twice, at the corporate level and then at the shareholder level when they pay taxes on the dividends. So just keep that in mind, that that is considered a negative of a corporation. But then, like I said, you can also do an LLC where it's supposed to have the advantages of the limited liability, where they can't go after your personal assets, but not the disadvantages. For example, the corporation where you have to pay double taxation. So an LLC would be another formation you could do. And then keep in mind that you may decide on a business formation, but then you change your mind later and do something completely different. And that is normal, that is okay. I started as a sole proprietorship, and then I formed an LLC, but then I changed my mind. Before I even told all my customers I was an LLC, I changed my mind because I realized that I wanted to be able to pay myself as an employee, because I don't like dealing with self-employment tax and estimated taxes. So I decided to set up a corporation. So my accounting business became 3 different business formations over time and 3 different names. So it is possible to change it. You are not set in stone with whatever you decide from the beginning. And then once you get your business formation decided, then you're going to decide on a name. So this would be 1. This would be 2. Now, the reason you have to think of your business formation first is because that might play a factor in what your name is going to be. If you're an LLC, you're probably going to have that in your name. If you're a corporation, you may have Inc. or Corp or something like that in your name. So it is helpful to know which business formation you're going to do first and then think of your name. Now, I wouldn't get too stuck on the name if you are stuck here. I always get stuck in this place, always, when I'm thinking of a new business, because I am just terrible at thinking of a name. Now, you can hire a marketing company probably to help you with this part if you really just can't think of a name, but try to keep it simple. Make sure the name is not being used in your state, in your county, and then you would want to make sure you could get a website with that name or with some variation of that name. And then just keep in mind, if you're a sole proprietorship, you can start doing business as your first and last name without necessarily thinking of a separate business name. Okay, and then once you get your name thought of, your business formation thought of, you're going to want to file the paperwork and get whatever licensing or approval to start doing business in your area after that. So I'm going to try to give you some direction on where to file, where to look to see what you need to do. It's going to be different for everybody because it really depends on your location. It depends on what country you're in and what state you're in if you're in the United States. So the first place that I would look is the Secretary of State in your state, assuming you're in the United States. So if you're an LLC or a corporation, more than likely you're going to need to file something with the Secretary of State, basically requesting permission or filing that you're going to be doing business in that state. It depends on where you're at on whether you have to file it if you're a sole proprietorship or a partnership. It really just depends. So you would need to either ask a professional in your area or look on your Secretary of State website and see if you can figure it out. A lot of Secretary of State websites have really good informational videos and websites to help you through this process. And basically, you would just fill out whatever paperwork the Secretary of State asks you to fill out. And it's usually pretty straightforward. I know in North Carolina, it was pretty easy to do this and file it. And it might take time and a small filing fee to do this. And then the second place I would recommend looking is your county in your area. So in my county in North Carolina, I had to fill out something called an assumed name form. And that was basically just a form that stated I was going to be doing business as such and such name, basically saying I was going to be doing business as that name in my county, in my state. There was a little box that I checked that said I was going to be doing business in all 100 counties. So this was pretty straightforward. I would not have needed to do it if I was a sole proprietorship and I was just doing business as my first and last name. I had to file this when I was doing business as some other name other than myself. So I'm going to put a question mark there because it really just depends on where you live. And I'm going to put a question mark beside Secretary of State because, again, it depends on what type of business you're forming and where you live. And then the third place that I would recommend looking, or the third thing I would recommend looking up, is whether you need some sort of business license or privilege license. It really varies based on where you're at, what state you're in, what county you're in, what city you are in, on whether you need some sort of business license or privilege license. So I'm just going to walk you through the steps of where I'm at, just to give you an idea of what I filed so that you know what to kind of look for. So when I first started my sole proprietorship, I didn't have to file anything with the Secretary of State. But because I had a name, an actual formal business name, I did have to file the assumed name form. And I have to actually pay for a privilege license in North Carolina, which is just $50 a year to say I'm doing business as an accountant. So I did those three things. I don't need an actual business license, but to me, the privilege license is something similar. So just keep in mind that you're going to want to look in your county, in your state, to see if you need to fill out these, if you need to file these things. And they all have a fee. There's always a fee involved. There's a fee for the Secretary of State filings, there's a fee for county filings, and there's a fee for privilege or business license filings. And then once you figure out your formation, your name, your paperwork and filings, and you do all that, there's a couple other things I want to mention. First of all, there's a website I found called howtostartanllc.com. I'm going to put a link in the description because it was a website that was filled with a lot of good information. And I think they have a YouTube channel as well. I'm not associated with this website whatsoever, but I thought I would mention it because it was a helpful website and I thought it was really good. And then another thing you may have to do is get an EIN through the IRS. You may not need this. I'm going to link a website, which is on the it's a page on the IRS website that you walk through some questions to try to figure out if you need an EIN. But basically, if you're going to be paying employees, you probably will need that EIN through the IRS. And then another thing that I want to mention is that if you are going to be preparing tax returns in your bookkeeping business, you're going to need a PTIN through the IRS as well. And keep in mind that this is public information unless you choose not to make your information public. So businesses or websites will pull your information from this database and put it on their websites. So if you don't want your home address public, then you may want to choose not to give out your information when you may choose to keep your information private when you apply for that PTIN. And I also want to point out that when you file with the Secretary of State, this is going to be public information. So this is going to open you up to a lot of spam. So you're probably going to get stuff in the mail from people trying to get you to buy stuff, buy their services, buy their business certificates and things like that you may not necessarily need. So I just want to point that out, that you are going to probably get that stuff if you file. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, but just keep in mind that I probably just know general information. I may not be able to answer questions specific to your area. And otherwise, my next video in this series is going to be about marketing and getting customers, so be sure to watch for that. Thanks for watching.